My name is Zishan Tokac. First, I would like to express that I've heard some wonderful presentations today, and I'm honored to be the last presenter of the day and of the program. Through this program that we are now about to graduate from, we have not only learned about tackling some of the most important challenges of our time, but we had the opportunity to experience this unique and vibrant city as well. In doing so, we have also become quite familiar with the challenge of finding suitable housing. On this personally relevant note, today I am here to discuss green affordable housing in New York City. New York is currently a city of 8 million residents that is expected to reach 9 million by the year 2040. This growth comes at a cost. The city needs to be able to accommodate its current and future residents without exacerbating income inequality. Our client, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, helps address this need by financing affordable housing across the city. The department works to ensure that cities' investment in affordable housing goes towards buildings that achieve deeper affordability through lowered utility bills and healthier living environments. Meanwhile, New York City has a long-standing reputation for environmental leadership in the battle against climate change. It has committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050, with intermediate goals, as you can see in this chart. But how does this issue relate to the housing sector? Well, in fact, New York City buildings are responsible for the 74% of the city's total greenhouse gas emissions, which means without a serious effort to curtail emissions from the housing industry, the city won't be able to reach its overarching climate change mitigation goals. Therefore, by financing more energy-efficient buildings, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development contributes toward the city's sustainability goals. For this reason, although their buildings represent a small portion of the city's housing stock, the department has launched a green affordable housing program to act as a pioneer. Since 2011, the department has required compliance with a list of green building criteria as a condition for funding. These criteria were developed by a nonprofit organization named Enterprise Green Communities. This organization, Enterprise, evaluates buildings along several factors, from water and energy use to sustainable design and health. Well, you may wonder why the department does not instead rely on LEED, the well-known green building certification criteria. The answer is simply that LEED is often cost-prohibitive, while Enterprise's criteria are specifically designed for affordable housing. In fact, the Enterprise criteria are very similar to LEED, but are self-reported and self-certified, making compliance with the criteria affordable. Thanks to this partnership with Enterprise Green Communities, so far in 5 years, 169 buildings have been certified as green and affordable by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. And the number of green affordable housing buildings is growing every year. But how do we know whether these buildings are actually greener? Are they more energy efficient? Do they use less water? Or do they actually contribute to the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions? In other words, is the program paying off? Previously, there were not enough measurable and reliable data to answer these questions since the program was so new. Completing its 5th year, only now is there enough data available to perform an evaluation. My team has had the privilege to perform the first detailed analysis of the program in an effort to answer these types of questions. More importantly, we created a framework for the organization to use in the future years to perform similar analyses. So let's take a look at how we accomplished this. Here is how we performed our analysis. First, we created comparable sample and control groups from our enterprise-certified green buildings and their uncertified non-green counterparts, meaning standard New York City buildings. We focused on energy use intensity and greenhouse gas data for our comparison. This type of data is available through one particular publicly available benchmarking source for buildings over 50,000 square feet. So in making our comparison, we chose buildings of at least that size and that are multifamily units. One important consideration is that this particular data source that I just mentioned is self-reported, so there may be inaccuracies. To avoid including inaccurate data in our analysis, we eliminated extreme values and compared buildings with only reliable and similar performance data and building areas. Additionally, we excluded lead buildings from our control simply because our control group was supposed to include only non-green buildings. Something to keep in mind is that the program provides financing for both new construction and rehabilitation. So another consideration was the point of time at which these changes are completed and buildings reach full occupancy. The reason this may be a concern is that if the building is not fully occupied, we won't know whether the reason for less energy use is better efficiency or just because there are less occupants. So we only analyze the data regarding the years after full occupancy is reached. So here are our final refined sample and control groups. We had started with 36,000 buildings for our control and ended up with around 300, and for our sample, we ended up with 22 buildings. These buildings have reliable, comparable, and current data. While the small number of buildings limits the scope of our analysis, in the future, when more data is available, a stronger analysis will be possible. So now let's take a quick look at what we have found so far. Here are our results. We've performed this analysis for the four most recent years of the program, yet the results were only statistically significant for the last two. Our analysis shows that in these years, enterprise green buildings were indeed more energy efficient compared to the standard ones. In 2015, enterprise green buildings performed 28% better than their counterparts, and in 2016, they performed 20% better, averaging 24% overall, which is great news for the program, whose goal was to reduce energy usage by 20%. This means enterprise buildings met the program's goals in both years and even surpassed it. Another piece of good news is that our analysis shows enterprise green buildings emit less greenhouse gas emissions as well. We gleaned this information by statistically proving that energy efficiency is highly correlated with the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So in 2015, enterprise buildings emitted 13% less, and in 2016, they emitted 10% less. For the earlier years, though, we were not able to draw a meaningful comparison due to a lack of data. For instance, in 2014, we had only 2 green buildings to analyze, and in 2013, even less, only 1, which makes a meaningful comparison difficult. But again, in the future, as the program grows and more robust data becomes available, a more conclusive analysis will be possible. This is why we created the framework that I've been mentioning for our client to use in the future. So we encourage the Department of Housing Preservation and Development to use this framework and repeat the same analysis with new data in the future in order to get better results, which will hopefully help them improve the program. Meanwhile, in the meantime, there are some concrete steps that the department can take that will simplify the process and improve the analysis in the future years. Our first recommendation is to require, remind, and enforce consistent annual reporting for all building managers, regardless of building size. Second is to ensure a standardized format for internal tracking sheets through all years. And finally, use the same building identification as other organizations so that these identifiers match between data sources. Following these recommendations, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development will be able to conduct similar performance analyses in the future with better results. These results will help them address any possible inefficiencies and adjust accordingly. Furthermore, by assessing the expected environmental benefits of the program, the department will be able to create more favorable financing terms for affordable housing projects. Overall, by proving that a green building can be affordable as well, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development will lead the way of climate change for New York City's housing sector. On behalf of my team, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Chris Hayes and the Department of Housing Preservation and Development for the opportunity to take part in this effort. I would also like to thank our faculty advisor, Adrian Hill, for her guidance through the project, and I want to thank all of you for listening. I'll be able to take any questions.
Thanks, Zishan. That was great. I have a question about, you mentioned rehabilitation of old buildings, and I was just curious over the course of your work, if you looked at the efficiency increases of buildings that had been retrofitted and rehabilitated as opposed to just buildings that had been built new according to these standards. And I was wondering if you saw similar efficiency gains in both.
Thank you, Jen. That's a great question. Actually, we looked at this. So due to time limitations, I didn't dive into it in this presentation. While comparing new buildings, new construction versus rehabilitation, the results were not, again, significant because, as you saw, I'll go back to the slide where I have the number of buildings. So let's say we have significant results for 2 years, for 2015 and 16, which has one of them has 8 green buildings, the other has 13 green buildings. And when you divide them up by new construction versus rehabilitation, the number is even smaller, which makes the results insignificant. But obviously, in the future years, this is something so important to look at.
I was wondering if you came across in your research any of the defining physical features of the buildings which led to such a drastic decrease in energy usage, which is approximately 20%, and in your results it showed it was 24%. I was curious about that.
Okay, so the scope of our analysis was to look at it at the macro level, not at the building level. However, what you say is actually important, and we actually hope this analysis, this framework, to lead to the building level analysis as well, where they can actually do on-site analysis, talking to building managers, collecting actual data, and they will be actually able to address what are the inefficiencies of the buildings and will adjust accordingly.